Hello and welcome back to Ride Rescue and my new project reveal. So stay tuned to the end of the video and I will tell you who is the winner of the binoculars that I'm giving away for the guesses on the car. Appreciate you participating. Alright, before I pull the cover off of this, I want to just do a real brief little history about the designer of this car. The guy's name was Brooks Stevens. He was an industrial designer. He had his own design company. The automakers, as the war was winding down, wanted to jump onto some new designs for the upcoming model years. Most of them, due to tooling changes, they kept with the designs from the early 1940s. This automaker wanted to do something totally different from what they were doing currently. And so they started looking for a designer that could help them. Brooks designed a motorcycle for Harley Davidson. He designed and built this prototype for Cadillac. They designed the Studebaker Hawk, and then they went on to design the Jeep Wagoneer. And that one was a very big hit. So Stevens has been given a lot of notoriety in his designs because he was doing a lot of designs. He designed the Miller beer logo, and he talked them into changing from the brown bottle to the clear bottle to show off the beer. There was a lot of other things that he did for products like Oscar Mayer Wiener. He designed the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile that was toured all over, and they actually built several of those. Even today, you can rent a Wienermobile and drive across the country. So, enough of him. Like I said, he designed this for the GIs that were coming back. They were hoping that the GIs would love it. It was a failure. So what is it? This is a 1950 Willys Overland Jeepster. And you can see from the logo on the door, that is the Shriners logo. As I mentioned before, this was actually used as a clown car. It was in parades. And it has a platform that's set up in the back for the clowns to climb on. So when Willys Overland commissioned the design of this, they wanted to use the platform of their wagon and their trucks, have that utility as well as the sporty look of a European sports car. So they used the nose that was used on both the truck and the wagons, and they also used the full chassis of the wagon that had the two-wheel drive. The suspension in this, in the front, it's independent suspension, but it runs off of a transverse spring system. This Jeepster, when it was new, was just over $1,500. At that same time, you could buy a Ford Deluxe completely loaded for less than that. And the Ford Deluxe convertible had windows. So the design of this, I'd mentioned in my last video that it had a term. This was the last Phaeton. The Phaeton sedan convertibles, the term was to a larger car, a sedan, not a coupe, four-door or a two-door, that didn't have windows. You could get windows for this. It was a vinyl window that snapped into place, slid down into these tracks. By all accounts, this is the last vehicle that was truly a Phaeton. There are a lot of cars made since that have been considered Phaetons, but they're not the true Phaeton because they have windows. So, interesting little Side note to the car, since this is built on a utility chassis and it is designed around a sports car theme, this really is one of the very first, if not the very first, sport utility vehicle, the SUV. Two-wheel drive, and it was built off of a truck. So it all that ties in. One of the things they did do, as you can see, Continental kit on the back. This Jeepster, somebody put the bumper off a wagon on it. This wraparound bumper wouldn't be seen on a Jeepster. In 1948, when this was released, the journalists loved it. A lot of fanfare, a lot of magazine articles, a lot of advertisements. They really pushed this vehicle. They were hoping the GIs, as they were coming back from the war, after enjoying playing with the Jeeps were just loved. And a lot of the Jeeps were going to farms. They were buying the farm trucks, they were buying the utility wagon. But when it came to a car, I think they were tired of what's inside. The Go Devil 4-cylinder engine that was originally made for this was a flathead 4-cylinder, had a whopping 63 horsepower. Had a 3 on the tree and an overdrive transmission. With the gear ratio that it had in the rear end, I believe it was a 410, 420, somewhere in the 4 range. Top speed, even with the overdrive transmission, was 55, 60 miles an hour. Also that year, they had the 6-cylinder engine. The 6-cylinder engine had an overhead valve versus the 4 that had the flathead. In 1948, when they were first produced, they sold roughly 12,000 cars. I think it was a little over 12,000 cars. In 1949, it dropped all the way down to about 3,000 cars. So they redesigned it. It just wasn't moving like they thought. A lot of the comments were the flat, boxy nose and hood. It just didn't have enough of the style. The gauge cluster that was on the dash was plain. So they redesigned the nose and the gauge cluster. So also in 1950, they changed the 4-cylinder from the flathead to an overhead valve, and they called it the Hurricane. Had a little more horsepower. Couldn't find the numbers on the horsepower, but that's what was stated. The 6-cylinder, they also increased the cubic inches a little bit, so it had a little bit more horsepower. They only made 400 of these with the 6-cylinder. So roughly 9,000, 9,300 were produced in 1950. Not all of them sold. So they dropped it. They finished out in 1951 with old inventory and decided to just abandon the whole Jeepster idea. So as I walk around the car, you can see the Afifi, I guess is what you call it, Grace Harbor. The Shriners cover on the spare tire. When I bought this, the guy said the convertible top was in really good condition. It just needed a new back window. There's holes in it. Lots of holes in it. The seams are coming undone. So these are one of those things that I had mentioned. You got to take a lot of what's being said when you're looking to buy a car. They're either not paying attention or they're just trying to say it's better than it is because they don't want to admit that it needs a new top. It's frustrating, but that is one of the things we run into when we're buying old cars. What's really interesting is that as I started doing more and more research on these Jeepsters, Shriners use these a lot in parades. I found at least 7 on the internet, and this is the only one that really had the metal stainless steel logo on the door. A lot of them had painted on logos, or they just had big magnet stick-on type logos. but most of them were the yellow Jeepster with either red trim or green trim, and some of them even had red and green trim, and a couple of them were just solid red. But it was a very popular vehicle, so you could put the top down and have dignitaries or beauty queens or clowns. As you can see, this one has some pretty poor chrome. The chrome is all peeling and fading. The front bumper, these typically have a big push bar on the front. That is missing. This one wouldn't normally have red fenders. They were painted red for the parade car, just like the interior with the stripes. So what would have had a back seat, you can see there's a platform that looks like it was created along the back as kind of a place to sit on, but mostly it was just a big platform to stand on. That black disc there is a big bell. It's probably like a fireman's bell. The armrest that would have been next to the original seat. And then the seats, the upholstery isn't bad. Considering its age. This was probably done in the 70s. But to kind of tie into that same theme, they did the colors to match. Dash-wise, originally you could get this with a radio in that area. Somebody had put in a radio, a cheap Sanyo from the cassette deck. That dial is a pressure dial. It was probably an air cannon, or maybe there was an air tank that was set up for air horns. It appears that there was probably some air horns that were mounted on the front fenders along with flags. You can see the original gauges there, and then some aftermarket gauges were added. There is a glove box. The glove box is key. It's one of the things that Jeepster prided themselves on, having that locking glove box, but I think a lot of the automakers were actually doing that as well. The automatic that was added during the 70s, you can see it's in pretty bad shape. It's barely hanging in there. The brake pedal is actually the clutch pedal. So it's quite a distance away from where it should be. It should be closer to the accelerator pedal. That accelerator pedal actually had been moved over, so it's almost underneath the steering column. So it's a little awkward in its placement and reaching for the pedals. So you have to concentrate on hitting the right pedal when you're going and stopping. It's an interesting catch. So under the hood you see this wonderful transplant. 1972, I think is what we figured this thing is. Pinto Mustang 2 4-cylinder. I don't think it has a whole lot of miles on it. It's pretty clean. Well, it runs really good, but it's not very desirable. But the flathead 4-cylinder or the overhead valve 4-cylinder from the original Jeepster was not that desirable either. But they hacked up the radiator support area to put in the Pinto radiator. That's really a mess. Cutting torch and beating on it with a hammer. Has an Auga horn. I love this cork that's stuffed into what was probably the smog pump. Another wonderful thing from the 70s, plastic hubcaps. These hubcaps were literally glued on and stuck on with double stick tape. But that is the original Willys Jeepster wheel. Those have become pretty valuable because they just vanished. There is a company that is remanufacturing steely wheels, but they don't have these clips for the original hubcaps. But you can see this is the original bias ply tire from the 70s. Actually in pretty good shape. One of the things that the seller had mentioned to me when I bought the car, I said, "Is it drivable? Could I drive it home?" And he said, well, for the fact that it has tires that are so old, he wouldn't recommend driving it. But he wasn't being totally honest with me, because there was a lot of things about this Jeep that would make it so that it wasn't drivable. The brakes are really sketchy. The rear end leaks. The suspension, I was looking underneath it as I got it up onto the trailer. That's pretty hokey. There's some teeny little cotter pins in the shock absorbers that are holding the shocks on. So it just isn't really roadworthy. So it was one of the things that he wasn't being fully honest about, like the top that he said was in good shape other than it needing a window, when the top is actually it's just rags, it's completely falling apart. So his idea of the top was in good shape, pretty strange. When it comes to restoring a car like this, there's a lot of things that you want that are original. The ashtray is missing. Those ashtrays are really difficult to find, very expensive if you do find one. I haven't been able to find one that's any good. Very expensive and in very poor condition. Should be a 3-speed on the column. That 3-speed is missing. All the linkage is missing. Like I had mentioned, the clutch pedal has been converted to a brake. The brake pedal has been cut off. I cannot find all those parts. So if I was to take this back to original, that would be very difficult to come up with. This little piece here on the side, I've been looking for 3 months. I finally found one. There's one on each side. It was $50 and it smashed. So I grabbed it because you never know if you're going to get another opportunity. I ended up finding another one for $75 and it was even worse condition. It was really smashed. And then this little piece here on the center of the dash, that was missing. And I just happened to find that. That also was $50. So yeah, some of these pieces are pretty expensive. I can't find these pieces. So if I want to restore these, then I'll have to have them re-chromed. But there are places that can do those. Tops are available, not too hard to find. These step pieces are available, remanufactured. They're $800. These are restorable. I don't know what it would cost to restore them, but I'm really fortunate that all of the trim is here. This trim is impossible to get. I couldn't find it anywhere. I've been watching and watching just out of curiosity, and I'm really lucky that it's in good shape because you can't get it. I found some bent pieces that were restorable that are really expensive. So when you're working with a car like this, you really need to know what you're getting into and what your plans are. Is this car fully restorable? Yeah, it could be restored. Does it make sense to restore it back to original? Yeah, maybe, if you could find all those parts. But there's just enough that I don't know if it could be found or not. The seat I found is broken off. You can see it's pretty strange, just a bent pipe type tubing. Where they mount this front mount underneath there, you can't see it, but it is broken off. So it's just barely kind of hanging on there. There's no seat belts. I don't know what that pedal is there, but I think it had something to do with maybe the air cannon or the air horns. This seat on the other side folds down and then flips all the way up and over. So you can get in and out of the back seat, or that's what these steps are for. So you can step up and into the back seat. With the top up, those steps are useless. You're not going to step up and climb in. So to get in here, you can't get in other than climbing over. So that funny little fold-up jump seat is your only way in and out of the back seat. That does not latch or strap down. So I just can't imagine back in the day when you didn't have seat belts, slamming on the brake with somebody in the back and throwing that person forward into the window and everything folding up. It's just pretty crazy. But there wasn't a whole lot of thought into safety back then. People weren't going as fast as they are today. So there you have it, my next project. So now, what am I going to do with it? When I originally bought this car, I was thinking, you know, if I just took the ugly off, take off the logos, paint the fenders, I could probably flip this and make some pretty good money on it. I bought it for $8,000. It's worth about $15,000 if I just take off the ugly. But after really getting this up onto the trailer and looking at everything underneath the car, I would never feel comfortable about selling this to somebody with the idea that they could drive it, because it is not drivable. It's not safe. The way this engine was put in and the cross member for the transmission, it is booger welded in so bad that it's embarrassing that somebody would do that. But because of the rear end gearing this has in it and a 4-cylinder and an automatic without the overdrive, the top speed on this car is only about 45 miles an hour. So it was perfect for a clown car. It is not good to drive. So finding the original engine and transmission and overdrive for this, I thought, well, maybe I could change the gear ratio in the rear end and I could make it more drivable. You can't. It's not available. So the only way to really change the gear ratio in this is to change the rear end. Since there are so many things like that, like the drivetrain that is wrong or missing, and this radiator shell is almost impossible to find, and if I did find one, would it be good enough that I could make it work, as well as it being a very expensive piece. There's so many things like that with this car that I'm going to go custom. To me, it doesn't make sense to bring it back to original. A 4-cylinder car. This car, in its condition, by book value, both NADA and Hagerty, is right around $8,000. Well, that's what I paid for. So I feel good about that. If I was to get this all running and drivable and safe, it's worth about $15,000 to $20,000. Well, it's going to cost me that much, if not more, to get it on the road and with all the labor. So then it makes more sense for me to just really make something nice out of this. And then I can get into the values. This car, fully restored with all the original drivetrain, the 4-cylinder engine, right around $30,000. With the 6-cylinder engine, I've seen them go for as high as $60,000. With a 4-cylinder, the value's just not there. The fun factor for this car, this would be a really fun, really unique little hot rod. So that's what I'm going to do. Under my workbench, I have a new motor and transmission for this car. We'll talk about it on the next upcoming videos, what my plan is for this. The front suspension in this thing, really sloppy. There is no kits or anything out there to tighten this up. For a 45 to 55 mile an hour car, that's fine. But if I'm going to go 80 on the freeway, with a really nice V8 in it. I'm going to want to change that. Plus, the stance on this car, it's not bad, but I want to lower it. This suspension, you can't. But I want to drop the nose, I want to drop the tail, I want to modernize the suspension, I want to get the fun factor into the drivability of this car. Alright, now for the giveaway. Thanks guys for participating in my giveaway. Tim Lewis, you're the winner of the binoculars. Thank you for putting in your guesses. I put all the names into a hat, pulled one out, and looks like Tim, if you want to send me your address, I'll leave a link below for my email address. Send me your information and I will get these in the mail to you. So thanks again for watching. Really appreciate it. Give me a like if you like what I'm doing. Subscribe, it really helps me grow my channel. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye for now.